In a quiet, forgotten town nestled deep in the Appalachian Mountains, there's a cemetery that the locals call the Watcher's Rest. The name might seem strange at first, but for those who have lived there long enough, the reason is clear. It's a place where the dead are said to watch the living, their eyes never quite closing, even in death. The cemetery is old, dating back to the early 1800s, and many of the tombstones are weathered, their inscriptions faded with time. The surrounding woods have started to reclaim the land, with roots pushing up through the soil and ivy crawling over the crumbling stone walls. It's a place few dare to visit after dark. Years ago, there was a man named Thomas Hargrove, a caretaker who tended the cemetery. He lived in a small, decrepit house on the cemetery grounds, a short distance from the graves. Thomas was a solitary man, rarely seen in town, and those who did see him noted his unsettling habit of talking to himself, as if he were conversing with someone invisible. For years, Thomas did his job without complaint, maintaining the graves, cutting the grass, and repairing the fences. He had no family, no friends, just the dead for company. As time went on, the townsfolk began to notice strange things. They would often find Thomas standing motionless by a particular grave, staring at it for hours. When asked what he was doing, Thomas would simply say, "She's watching me." The grave belonged to a woman named Eliza Winthrop, who had died young in her early 20s. The cause of her death was unknown, but local legend claimed she was cursed, a witch who had been shunned by the town. Her grave was isolated from the others on the edge of the cemetery, and the stone was always cold to the touch, even in the height of summer. One evening, as the sun was setting, a group of teenagers dared each other to visit the cemetery after dark. They had heard the stories about the Watcher's Rest, about how the dead never truly slept there, but they were skeptical. Armed with flashlights and bravado, they ventured into the cemetery. As they walked among the graves, they heard strange noises, whispers carried on the wind, the crunch of leaves behind them when no one was there. They tried to laugh it off, but unease settled over them like a heavy blanket. Finally, they found themselves standing before Eliza Winthrop's grave. The air was colder there, and an unnatural silence fell over the group. One of the boys, eager to prove his courage, stepped forward and tapped the headstone with his foot. "Come on, Eliza," he taunted. "If you're really watching, show yourself." For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the ground beneath them began to tremble, as if something deep within the earth was stirring. The boy stumbled back, his bravado crumbling, as a cold, ghostly mist began to seep from the grave. The mist coiled around the group, chilling them to the bone. In the distance, they heard a soft female voice whisper, "Leave now, or stay forever." Panic set in, and the teenagers fled the cemetery, the mist chasing them until they crossed the threshold of the gates. Once outside, the mist receded, vanishing back into the shadows. The boys didn't stop running until they were safe in their homes, but the experience left them shaken, and they never spoke of it again. The next morning, the town was abuzz with news. Thomas Hargrove had been found dead, slumped over Eliza Winthrop's grave. His eyes were wide open, frozen in a look of sheer terror. The coroner could find no cause of death, but the expression on Thomas's face told the town all they needed to know. He had seen something beyond comprehension in his final moments. The town buried Thomas in the cemetery he had cared for all his life, not far from Eliza's grave. After his death, no one was willing to take his place as caretaker. The cemetery fell into disrepair, the graves overgrown with weeds, the paths choked with vines. But even in neglect, the Watcher's Rest remained a place of eerie vigilance. Years passed, and the story of Thomas Hargrove became a cautionary tale. The children of the town were warned never to visit the cemetery at night, never to disturb the graves. But every so often, someone would hear the whispers again, or catch a glimpse of a shadow moving among the tombstones where no shadow should be. and those who dared to stand by Eliza Winthrop's grave, those brave or foolish enough to test the legend, would sometimes feel it, the weight of unseen eyes upon them, watching, waiting. For in the watcher's rest, the dead do not sleep. They watch and they remember. And if you're not careful, they might just take you with them into the cold, silent earth. It was a cold October night when a group of friends decided to visit the old cemetery on the edge of town. The cemetery, known for its age-old graves and eerie atmosphere, had become a popular spot for thrill seekers and urban explorers. But tonight, the group was different. They were looking for something more than just a thrill. They were searching for a story, something to capture their friends' imagination and send shivers down their spines. Among the friends was Jason, a local historian with a particular interest in the cemetery's history. He had heard rumors of a spectral figure that roamed the grounds at night and was determined to find out if there was any truth to the stories. Armed with nothing more than their flashlights and a couple of cameras, the group set out just after midnight, hoping to capture something on film that would set their video apart. As they entered the cemetery, the dense fog began to roll in, enveloping the area in an otherworldly shroud. The moonlight barely pierced through the thick mist, casting long, eerie shadows that danced across the ancient tombstones. The friends split up to cover more ground, each with their own task. One was to film the surroundings, another to record any strange noises, and Jason was to document their findings. Jason made his way to the farthest corner of the cemetery, where the oldest graves were located. These graves were marked with weathered, moss-covered stones, some barely legible. He had always been fascinated by the stories of those long gone, their lives reduced to mere names and dates etched into stone. As he examined one particularly old grave, he heard something that made him freeze in place. Footsteps. But not the sound of footsteps from his friends. These were heavy, deliberate, and coming from a direction opposite to where the rest of the group was supposed to be. Jason's flashlight flickered as he turned towards the sound, but he saw nothing. He shrugged it off, thinking it might just be his mind playing tricks on him. The footsteps continued, growing closer and closer until they stopped abruptly. Jason's heart raced. He turned off his flashlight to better listen. The silence was profound, broken only by the distant rustling of leaves. He felt a chill run down his spine and tried to steady his breathing. Just as he was about to turn his light back on, he heard a whisper, barely audible but unmistakable. "Jason." He spun around, but there was no one in sight. His flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing nothing but rows of old graves and fog-shrouded trees. He called out to his friends, but there was no reply. Feeling uneasy, he decided to head back towards the meeting spot. As Jason walked briskly through the cemetery, he noticed something peculiar. The layout seemed different. The paths that were once familiar were now twisted and confusing. The tombstones appeared to have shifted, and the fog seemed to thicken with each step he took. Panic began to set in. He called out again, but still no answer came. He stumbled upon a small, dilapidated mausoleum he had never seen before. It was hidden behind a veil of thick ivy and obscured by shadows. Driven by curiosity and a hint of desperation, he approached the mausoleum. The iron door creaked open with an unsettling groan, and he hesitated before stepping inside. The interior was dimly lit by the flickering beam of his flashlight. Dust motes danced in the air, and the smell of mildew was overpowering. Jason's heart pounded as he scanned the small chamber. In the center was an ornate coffin, its surface intricately carved with symbols and patterns he didn't recognize. A sense of dread washed over him, but he couldn't bring himself to leave. Just then, a cold breeze swept through the mausoleum, extinguishing his flashlight. He fumbled with it, trying to get it to work again. When the light flickered back on, Jason was horrified to see a figure standing at the entrance of the mausoleum. It was a man, or at least it appeared to be a man, though he was dressed in old-fashioned clothes from a bygone era. His face was obscured by the shadows, but his presence exuded an unsettling aura. Jason tried to speak, but no words came out. The figure stepped forward, and Jason felt an icy hand grip his shoulder. The sensation was like nothing he had ever experienced, cold and unnatural. The figure's voice was a harsh whisper. "You shouldn't be here." Jason tried to pull away, but the grip was unyielding. Panic surged through him as he struggled to free himself. The figure's eyes, now visible in the dim light, were hollow and lifeless. Jason finally wrenched free and fled from the mausoleum, his flashlight flickering sporadically as he ran. He made it back to the meeting spot, breathless and shaking. His friends were gathered there, looking worried. They had been searching for him, calling out and using their own flashlights to look for any sign of him. Jason recounted his experience, his voice trembling as he spoke. His friends listened intently, their faces growing pale. They decided it was best to leave the cemetery immediately, feeling a sense of urgency that was both unsettling and palpable. The next day, Jason returned to the cemetery with a team of local historians and paranormal investigators to search for the mausoleum he had encountered. They scoured the grounds for hours, but found no trace of it. The mausoleum seemed to have vanished, leaving them with no explanation for Jason's harrowing encounter. To this day, the old cemetery remains a place of mystery and intrigue. The story of the Midnight Walker, as Jason's encounter came to be known, continues to be a chilling tale among locals. Some say the spectral figure is a guardian of the cemetery, while others believe it is a restless spirit bound to the mausoleum that Jason stumbled upon. Whatever the truth may be, the legend serves as a chilling reminder that sometimes the things we seek in the darkness are best left undisturbed. Rosewood Cemetery, situated on the outskirts of the small, sleepy town of Dunsford, was known for its serene beauty and historic gravestones. With its lush, overgrown grounds and ancient oak trees, the cemetery was a picturesque place during the day, but locals whispered about strange occurrences that defied explanation. The most chilling of these stories revolved around the legend of a ghostly figure that roamed the cemetery at night, particularly near the grave of a young girl named Clara. Clara's story was a tragic one. She had died in the early 1900s, just 11 years old, from a sudden illness. Her family had been devastated by the loss, and Clara's grave was marked with a beautifully ornate headstone that stood out among the rest. The legend said that Clara's spirit never found peace, and those who ventured into the cemetery after dark often reported unsettling experiences near her resting place. The story that has become local lore began in the summer of 1995, when a group of 4 college friends decided to test their courage and explore the cemetery at night. They were a mix of history enthusiasts and thrill seekers: Jenny, Mike, Laura, and Tom. They had heard the stories about Clara and were intrigued by the possibility of encountering something supernatural. The night they chose to visit was unusually foggy. The dense mist clung to the ground, shrouding the cemetery in an eerie, almost suffocating veil. The moonlight struggled to penetrate the thick fog, casting an otherworldly glow over the gravestones and ancient trees. Armed with flashlights, a video camera, and a few ghost hunting tools, the friends entered Rosewood Cemetery just after midnight. Jenny, who was fascinated by local legends, had done some research on Clara and led the group towards the girl's grave. As they approached, the air grew colder, and an unsettling silence fell over the cemetery. The usual nighttime sounds of crickets and rustling leaves seemed to vanish, replaced by an oppressive stillness. When they reached Clara's grave, the temperature dropped even further. Jenny read aloud from her notes about Clara's tragic death, and the friends set up their camera and EVP, electronic voice phenomena, recorder. They took turns speaking to the empty grave, asking if Clara's spirit was present and if she had any messages. For the first hour, nothing happened. The friends were beginning to feel a mix of relief and disappointment when Tom, who had been sitting quietly on a nearby bench, suddenly noticed something strange. "Guys, look at this," he said, pointing to the ground near Clara's grave. The group gathered around and saw something that made their blood run cold. The ground near the headstone seemed disturbed, as if something or someone had recently been moving the soil. The area was not just uneven, it looked like a fresh grave had been dug up. The friends exchanged nervous glances, their earlier excitement giving way to genuine fear. Jenny, driven by curiosity, reached out to touch the disturbed soil when they all heard a soft, almost inaudible crying sound. It was a faint, childlike sobbing that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The friends froze, their hearts pounding in their chests. The sound grew louder and more desperate, and the temperature around them continued to drop. Laura, trying to remain calm, suggested they use the EVP recorder to capture the crying. As she set up the device, the sobbing stopped abruptly. The sudden silence was deafening, and the friends were left feeling more unsettled than before. They continued their investigation, trying to shake off the fear that had settled over them. As they reviewed the footage on the camera, they noticed something chilling. In the corner of the frame, a shadowy figure seemed to move around Clara's grave. It was a fleeting image, barely visible, but it was enough to make their skin crawl. Mike, who had been the most skeptical of the group, tried to rationalize the shadow as a trick of the light or a problem with the camera. But as they prepared to leave, he was the first to notice something truly horrifying. He saw a small, shadowy figure darting between the gravestones, its movements quick and erratic. It was too fast and too elusive to be captured on camera, but its presence was unmistakable. Desperate to leave, the friends made their way back to the cemetery gate, but the oppressive fog seemed to close in around them. The feeling of being watched was overwhelming, and every noise, whether it was the rustling of leaves or the distant hoot of an owl, seemed amplified and sinister. Just as they reached the gate, the crying started again, louder and more intense than before. It was now accompanied by a cold, gusty wind that seemed to swirl around them, as if the cemetery itself was protesting their departure. The friends sprinted to their car, their fear pushing them to move faster than they ever had before. They drove away from Rosewood Cemetery with their hearts still racing, the image of the shadowy figure haunting their thoughts. The footage and recordings they captured that night were analyzed by experts, but no concrete evidence of paranormal activity was found. Still, the chilling experiences they had endured that night were very real to them. Years later, the story of that night became a local legend in Dunsford. People who visited Rosewood Cemetery after dark claimed to have heard the same crying and felt the same oppressive presence the friends had experienced. Clara's grave remained a focal point for the supernatural, and while many dismissed the stories as mere ghost tales, others couldn't ignore the chilling evidence of those who had come before. Rosewood Cemetery, with its serene beauty and hidden horrors, stands as a testament to the power of local legends and the enduring mystery of the supernatural. The haunting of Clara's grave serves as a chilling reminder that sometimes the stories we tell are not just tales. They are echoes of something far darker and more profound. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe to my channel. It's totally free, and it really helps my channel grow.